is considerable force in the warning given by the prophet against his disciples copying his fasting over and above the semi-fast of Ramadan. My Maker sends me food enough when I fast, not so to you, said the prophet. Gandhi's Health Guide.
Gandhi's health guide should not be dismissed as crankery and faddism. It has important insights about what a human being is and how we can be healthy. Many times his immediate colleagues, moved by sympathy and great admiration for him, wanted to go on a fast when he was fasting, particularly those occasions when he fasted unto death. But he said, no, it is not for you to do that. And he laid out about 5 rules for a political fast. And the first of these was, you have to be the right person for the job. I interpret that to mean you have to really be psychologically, spiritually prepared to lay down your life. Otherwise, you're just fooling, and you're going to stop at some point and really end up weaker than you started. So being able to fast is actually only achieved at a very high spiritual level of development, if we're talking about a fast unto death. Because don't forget, when you fast in a very deep spiritual way, realized on this very basic material level, you are withdrawing from the fellowship of your fellow human beings. And you have to be careful how you make that kind of statement.
I appreciate so much that Gandhi was protecting his disciples and the people who tended to want to follow him from copying him when it wasn't appropriate. And at the same time, I would like to share my own thoughts as somebody involved in medicine, that I would not necessarily hold up Gandhi as an example of good health, maybe spiritual health, maybe communal health. Those are qualities that he seemed to prize. But I don't know that his tradition prized physical health very much. And so I would hesitate as a more Taoist-aligned person to follow any principles that he recommends. And so I have that feeling. And even within Buddhism, the Buddha himself, Gautama Buddha, was somebody who followed an ascetic path for a while, which is to say he starved himself and he lived in a way that was damaging to his body, which at the time he was following teachers who said that that would be a way to heighten his spirituality. And the Buddha himself, Siddhartha, decided that that was not a way toward spiritual path. It was not a way toward enlightenment, that there was a middle way that could involve the physical health at the same time. And so these traditional old methods that did indeed come from India, as far as I know, these ascetic passages through life where you would injure your body as a way to cultivate the spirit, I personally disagree with that and would recommend that people not follow those practices. That's my personal opinion. And that there is a way to cultivate the spirit, to heal the emotions, and to heal the body at the same time. And that in fact is better for your community than self-mortification methods.
It is easy to see that soul force is infinitely superior to body force. Gandhi from the mind of Mahatma Gandhi.
I wish it were easy to see for everyone, particularly as since Gandhi's time, society has been only more embedded in materialism. But for anyone who has a sense of their own spiritual nature, which automatically includes the spiritual nature of other human beings, then it does in fact become perfectly obvious that soul force is much more powerful. The philosophical and metaphysical model that I adopt is that consciousness or spirit has created mind, mind has created body, and so therefore all the creative power really arises with spirit or soul.
not sure if I have a particular perspective on this philosophical modeling of human existence, the shape of the world, the nature of spirit in relationship to the body, relationship to the rest of the space, how that works. I can let you know what the Hindus think, let you know what the Taoists think. Maybe I haven't yet developed an opinion about this. Feel free to share yours down below in the comment section. And at the same time, it's certainly important. We can all agree that it is certainly very important and powerful to cultivate these interior qualities of what we might call spirit. These qualities of clarity and wholesomeness, of kindness, of deep unconditional love. These things are healing to us, they're healing to the space around us. And wherever they come from, and whatever priority we place upon them, I don't know that it matters. I think that it can be clearly shown that it does matter to cultivate them, to take them seriously, to make them part of our lives as activists and change makers and just people who care about our community. If we step into that realm, it becomes a powerful aspect of our daily lives.
A man of faith will remain steadfast to truth even though the whole world might appear to be enveloped in falsehood. Gandhi, from the mind of Mahatma Gandhi.
It's a fascinating paradox about spirituality that you become more aware of your unity with other human beings. You have a lively, empathetic realization of them, but at the same time, you do not identify them with their mind, so therefore often not with their policies. And that enables you to be for the human being while against their policies. In fact, it's because you're for them that you're against harmful policies that they have come to adopt.
I agree that it's very common, in fact, that I can be against somebody's policies. I can think not very highly of someone's ideas and still be for them, still be supportive of them. For instance, my example I was using a moment ago of my opinion of Gandhi's ideas around health versus my appreciation and support of Gandhi's ideas in general. And so as long as we are angling ourselves toward the truth and the willingness to accept as true whatever it is reflected in reality, we want our ideas to be as matching the world of reality as possible. I want to believe in the truth, not falsehoods, and to be committed to truth as a way through. And if we then say, okay, what we want is a world that is more peaceful, more nourishing for everybody involved, something that uplifts everybody, that reduces suffering as much as possible. And now I say, and I'm committed to the truth. I start to look then at the experiments of nonviolence, for instance, versus the experiments in violence, and I see which one works better, which one has the outcome that we're looking for. And then slowly continuing to angle ourselves toward reality, toward the truth of the situation, letting go of our preconceptions. Slowly we become closer and closer to the ideal of understanding what's actually best for the world. And we can apply those things that we learned from our experiments in the real world. And this becomes the movement toward peace and nonviolence.
If it is allowed for some that the practice of love is possible, it is arrogance not to allow even the possibility of its practice in all the others. Gandhi, September 26, 1936.
This would seem to be true on the face of it, and yet how rarely is it actually realized in political life. We deny the capacity of others to love and That's part of denying their humanity. And once we accept that they're human beings like us, that means they're capable of love. That means that their love can be reached if we approach them in a nonviolent spirit.
I cannot tell you how many times in conversation I have been talking with somebody, and the worst person imaginable for our perspective in politics or in education or in love shows up in conversation. The person who believes and acts in the exact opposite way that we would want. And you can just imagine who that person is for you. And in that conversation, then I would say something like, I hope so much for them, that they heal and that they recognize what they're doing to themselves, to the world around them, how much hatred or violence they're stoking, how much worse off their own community and family is when they behave this way. I would love for them to be able to have an epiphany and wake up, the way that so many of us do. It happened to me. I'm certain it could happen to them. They're not any different than I am. They're just further down that particular rabbit hole. And maybe at some point they have an awakening experience and they come to begin to love their neighbor. They want to change how they are. And so often, the person that I'm having this conversation with will say something like, oh, that could never happen to them. It's impossible for this person to heal, basically. And I have to reject that idea that we're all human, that we all have the possibility of healing. There's so many examples in history of the worst possible person becoming somebody really valuing respect and love in the world and really worthy of respect from the rest of us. In fact, there is a very famous story of one of the great followers of the Buddha, and he essentially was a bandit and a murderer who wore a necklace of body parts around his neck as a way to terrorize the local population. And one day the Buddha was walking through this mountain pass, according to the story, and they had an encounter, this terrible murderer and the Buddha. And the murderer was changed by his encounter and became a follower of the Buddha. And later, honestly, became one of his students and became one of these people that passed down the documents of the Buddha and current methods of enlightenment for the rest of us, became free at the end of his life. So this is an example of the worst possible person imaginable, becoming awake and free and capable of love. And whether or not the story is true, the example certainly is. And we have to be able to allow everybody the chance to heal. No matter what we think of them, love is always possible, as Gandhi says. And we must keep that space open for them, welcoming for them to be embraced in our circle of compassion.
Do you believe that a coward can ever disobey a law that he dislikes? Gandhi from Hind Swaraj.
Pretty pertinent question there. Coward is a harsh term. Someone lacking in sufficient courage will be cowed down by laws and by the fear of punishment. And people who espouse civil disobedience are quick to remind us that the law cannot actually tell us you cannot do this. It can only tell you, if you do this, we will do that. And so if you say, okay, go ahead, do it, you are then free to disobey the law. That requires self-confidence and courage of the highest order. And it's redeeming for human societies.
To have the courage of our convictions, the willingness to say, yes, I understand that is a law, but it is an unjust law. And what I follow is justice, and I will refuse to follow that law. And I certainly think there are some lines there. Some people will be petty about it. They'll think it's unjust for them to not be able to cross the street at this point. And so they walk across anyway, breaking the law. But Where does that line end? Again, so many people will be willing to say that the law applies to people other than themselves. Again, we have examples of this in the top of our head. People who don't think the law applies to them because they're too powerful or too rich. Doesn't really matter. Or they just don't care what other people think. But in society, we have to recognize the importance for order, for us working together towards something to keep each other safe. And so it's very important to follow the laws, in my opinion, and at the same time to recognize that the people making the laws are often themselves unjust. There are plenty of examples in our history of the world where people make laws around atrocities and terrible things. Apartheid, for instance. The Nazi laws. Laws that happen in certain countries that are based upon terrible religious ideals that force people into essential slavery. And again, it's very difficult. Do we then resist these laws and put ourselves in possible circumstances like Gandhi did, to go to jail consistently, or worse, to be punished in other ways? How do you step up in a heroic way and at the same time pick your battles, knowing that the system itself may be so large that it just runs you over without taking notice? That's not a very useful reason to go to jail or to be executed. And so I feel like there is a line of understanding here. There's a level of skill that's required in order to engage with these systems to help them change in a way that doesn't just harm yourself for no purpose, but rather to take a stand, a just stand against an unjust law in a way that helps to generate change. And so hopefully people have ideas. They can put them down in the comments below. I'd like to learn from all of us. And I know that this is something that is often discussed within Gandhi literature and other activist literature, that there's a time and place for all of these things. And I look forward to learning about them with the rest of you.
Real Swaraj will come not by the acquisition of authority by a few, but by the acquisition of the capacity by all to resist authority when it is abused. In other words, Swaraj is to be attained by educating the masses to a sense of their capacity to regulate and control authority. Gandhi, Young India, January 29th, 1925.
As usual, Gandhi sees Swaraj, an ancient word meaning freedom, in its full spiritual sense, meaning freedom of the individual from wayward impulses, anger, violence, things like that. And he felt that if that was established well enough among a large enough number of people, political liberation would follow as a matter of course. But it was an ongoing process. It wasn't just a thing that you knock off one day through a revolution. It was a real re-education of what is the role of the individual in a polity.
Swaraj as freedom in a greater context. And it certainly starts with internal freedom, becoming yourself free from the constraints of your fears, as Gandhi often liked to say that fear is the first thing that we have to overcome in a movement. Free of the need for things, which Gandhi again teaches, to become less needy for greedy things. Less need for acquisition, less attachment to the physical world around you, to become more free inside. And then we begin to resist and to develop authority so that that freedom is then passed and made available to other people. And so by educating the people around us for the possibility of freedom, to understand where contentment, where health, the health of the community, where the health of the body lies, where freedom can come from emotionally, physically, politically. These are all possibilities. True Swaraj covers all of these things. And to take it in that larger context of healing and health and freedom for the whole community. How to uplift a whole people in order to make this possible, to make it available for everybody. That is quite a task.
If everyone lives by the sweat of his brow, the earth will become a paradise. Gandhi, from the mind of Mahatma Gandhi.
This may seem naive, but really the question is, it's a very big if. Because if everyone lived by the sweat of his or her brow, that would eliminate the need for excess. And if you eliminate that need, then by and large, the necessity for conflict and violence would disappear. So the value of his making this statement is not that it's something that it's easy to do and will come up right away, but it's reorienting the question to, again, the role of individual responsibility.
And that makes it important for us then to make work possible for everybody, so that we're not being ableist, for instance. We make non-physical labor possible for those who are too old, too infirm, or unmoving to do farm labor, for instance. To use Gandhi's specific sweat on the brow example, that's not available and possible for everybody. And so if we want to offer the opportunity to support themselves to everybody, we have to figure out ways to extend, again, that circle of economic compassion even to them, which is one of the wonderful qualities of virtual online work. And so that is one important piece of this Gandhian economics. I think that is very important, to recognize that everybody has different barriers, and then we want to figure out ways to allow all of those barriers to be overcome, so everybody has equal access and the opportunity to grow and to uplift themselves and their community. And the more we can do that, the more free we all become.
If I had the power, I would stop every Sadavrata where free meals are given. Gandhi, Young India, August 13th, 1925.
Sadavrata, as he says, is a place where food is handed out to spiritual speakers, pilgrims, or other needy people. And he was rootedly opposed to people taking without giving. In one memorable case, when the horrible rioting was going on in Noakhali, he told one of his nieces not to give food to refugees whose homes had been burned. They had absolutely nothing. He said, they have nothing except their dignity. Now don't take that away from them. So what he wanted her to do was give them an opportunity to work for some food. That way their human dignity as well as their physical nutrition would be satisfied. And the former was really much more important. Now, if you look at the really terrible situation that's going on in Gaza today, it's possible to interpret the dropping of food from airplanes by the United States, possibly some other European powers, as something that's almost as bad as the dropping of bombs by Israeli drones. Because again, it emphasizes the helplessness and the dependency of the people on the ground. Mind you, in this present instance, that may be about the best you can do. But when you're reduced to the best of all possible bad options, I think it's a signal to think, how did we get into this situation? Inherently, there should be a humane, positive, constructive way of solving every problem. And if there isn't, something is structurally wrong.
I agree with Michael that there are all kinds of levels of need to support people, that, again, we have this escalation curve of different kinds of protest and activist work that's required depending on how bad the situation is. That's over on the website at the Metta Center, if you want to look at that. All of the links down below, of course. And to recognize that there are times when you make the best choice that you have among very few bad decisions. And very often, because as a populace, we don't take preventative action, or we allow things to become terrible, like absolute starvation, for instance, and genocide. As a human population, we tend to move very slowly to solve these problems for some reason. And so we wait until there's the worst of all possible things happening, the worst disease infection rate, and then we start to make a change. The worst famine that's occurring around the world, the worst crime that's occurring, then we move to do something. And if we can take into account the possibility of these things and then add preventative measures into our lives, of course, then we can start to make better and better decisions ahead of time. We put in obstructions toward atrocity, so it's not as easy for bad things to happen. If we recognize that crime will come when an area starts to starve, rather than fighting the crime, we say, well, how do we prevent starvation or economic deterioration? How do we prevent that so that people don't become desperate? So we solve the crime ahead of time by keeping the people healthy and giving them better options, these kinds of things. The more preventative that we think, then we have better and better options to choose from. We can choose the best of good options rather than the worst of the bad options. And so I think that in particular, Gandhi's referencing the specific situation he was in here in 1925, rather than trying to make general advice for people. But his point is well made.
To serve one's neighbor is to serve the world. Gandhi, Ashram Observances in Action.
Gandhi was often asked, how can I serve the world? And people came to him with these enormous ambitions because of the entire world is in such dire straits. But he had this amazing faith that we are responsible for the immediate circle in which we find ourselves. And when we behave appropriately in that circle, like through service primarily, then that circle will expand slightly. But the almost panicky tendency to overleap one's immediate circle and serve, quote, the whole world, unquote, would be to lose both.
And I love the phrase that Gandhi will make oftentimes, which is to do the good that's in front of you. I've heard Michael mention this. Do the immediate thing that's in front of you, the good that you can see right now. Even in this moment, wherever you are, there's some good thing that you can take part in. Do that thing. Get into the habit of choosing the compassionate choice. One of the ways that I started, which is perhaps a bit funny, but you may find it helpful as well, is that I felt so desperate to try to make a change, but I didn't know where to start. And so I started with the very small things. I started cleaning the spaces that I was in. Every time I went into a room, before I left, I would leave the room a little bit cleaner than I entered it. I'd go into the bathroom, somebody else's bathroom, and perhaps I'd wipe down the chrome before I walked away. Some small thing. And by getting into that habit, even though it took me 1 second, 2 seconds in each of these places, public bathrooms included, I started seeing the world as a space of opportunities to make a difference, to do small good things all the time. At this point in my life now, I don't know how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of those small good deeds that I've done, but it's become part of the way that I interact with the world. And it really does generate hope and opportunity. You start to look for opportunities rather than look for obstructions. And so you may find that kind of suggestion really helpful. It was generally very helpful for me to look at small things first and always just tell yourself, I don't know how to make the world a better place, but I can do the good that's in front of me right now.
My patriotism is not exclusive. Gandhi, Young India, March 4th, 1924.
I've just been reading a very exclusive definition of patriotism by Prime Minister Netanyahu. This was the great vision of unity and diversity, which brings with it the faith that in order for me to thrive, you do not have to suffer compromises. We can all thrive together once we've recognized what our needs really are. And so therefore he is able to have a kind of patriotism, meaning, for example, political freedom for India and much more for India, but at no point would it be at the expense of any other country. It was not even at the economic expense of the British Empire to let India go. And our late friend Kenneth Boulding proved that despite the looting and despoliation of Indian resources, it was actually costing the British more to maintain the empire than to dissolve it and get on their way.
And that, I think, is actually one of the most wonderful nonviolent methods that we have available to us, is that in a world where economics is prized more than morality and judgment, one of the ways that we can make it difficult for people to do the worst possible atrocities is to make it too expensive. So if there's a kind of action that you don't like, that you are against, without harming anybody, find a way to make it too expensive for them to continue. Make it cost more. Slow everything down. And so that is one simple way, often safe, in order to make a small difference. And if people do that by the millions, something becomes impossible. So we have to find a more cost-effective way. And usually the best way is to heal others. And so maybe people try that and discover that that also can be cost-effective. But what we want to do is to think of our world, think of our country, think of our countries as a people, as humans. We want to become patriotic for the earth, for humanity. We want to think highly of what we've accomplished as a people and to look forward as a people. How do we lift each other up and overcome this stupid factionalism which has destroyed us? And instead we uplift all of us together. We have one flag that has the human earth on it, and we wave that flag proudly and say, look what we have accomplished. Look what we have the possibility of becoming. How do we help all of us rise up as a people, a human people, to make the world a better place? That's the kind of patriotism I can get behind.
A violent man's activity is most visible while it lasts, but it is always transitory. Hitler and Mussolini on the one hand and Stalin on the other are able to show the immediate effectiveness of violence, but the effects of Buddha's nonviolent action persist and are likely to grow with age. And the more it is practiced, the more effective and inexhaustible it becomes. And ultimately, the whole world stands agape and exclaims, "A miracle has happened." All miracles are due to the silent and effective working of invisible force. Nonviolence is the most invisible and the most effective. Gandhi from My Nonviolence.
As usual, some of these little gem-like statements really embody an entire philosophy of life and reality. So the underlying principle here is that reality is fundamentally positive. That is implicit in the Sanskrit word sat, meaning that which is, truth, and also good. So this is a universal principle that you really cannot escape. unfortunately, often that truth underlying things takes a while to show up. And so, unfortunately, we're not trained to be patient and look for long-term results. We're not trained to connect the dots. We imprison a lot of people, crime gets worse, and very few people can actually say it is because we treated human beings harshly that they behave harshly. So he's really undercutting or exposing two very damaging false beliefs that are controlling a lot of our policy and behavior.
Yeah, that's very wise. And to recognize again that a person can behave harshly because we have been treating them harshly. And so one of the reasons that people will often choose violence is because it has an immediate, observable effect. I do this thing, and look, this thing happens. And we have such a short attention span. I think it's why we need to have a silence of nonviolence. We need to take notes. We need to keep an eye out, to look and to come back a year later to see how things are. We can come back a year or two later and see what happened with Hitler and Mussolini, Stalin. They got quick effects, but look what happened because of it. How terrible, how horrifying things became. This is the effect of violence. Smaller violence, of course, leads smaller results, but just as terrible in comparison to the accumulation of nourishment and healing of a community, the uplifting of everybody. And then because it's slow and gentle, because it works at the speed of nature, the way we watch a flower growing, we look outside one day, if we haven't been paying attention, we say, wow, look at all the flowers in the field. And if we planted those seeds in spring or the year before, maybe we forgot, and suddenly they're there. But they've been growing underground the whole time, because that's what nature does. It heals, it nourishes, it grows. And if we can work with nature in this Taoist perspective, then all at once, the world is conspiring to create this situation of beauty, that the seeds we're planting, they blossom. And those are the kinds of seeds that we want to be planting in the world. Ones that leave us better off, leave us with a beautiful world, healthy people, healthy societies. Plant those seeds today, the small ones, and people will look around and be surprised. Wow, look what happened. That's such a better way to live.
To prepare for home rule, individuals must cultivate the spirit of service, renunciation, truth, nonviolence, self-restraint, patience. They must engage in constructive work in order to develop these qualities. Gandhi, Young India, January 8th, 1925.
Let me make two observations here. One, that the preparation for home rule in his case was so much deeper than mere political struggle. But he often said that the kind of struggle in which we engage will characterize the kind of Swaraj that we end up with. As he said, violent revolution will bring violent Swaraj, where Swaraj means freedom or the kind of regime that goes forward without political control by an outside party. The other point that deserves emphasis here is his emphasis on the constructive aspect of the work. From the earliest days in South Africa, he felt that the community uplifting itself was even more important than resisting the injustice of the oppressive community or organization. And in fact, that if you really did everything that you can to take care of your own difficulties and uplift your own self, you will probably find that your problem with the opponent is almost solved automatically.
And again, so much of this comes back to healing ourselves first, to take the time to cultivate our own local harmony, health, centeredness, our capacity for service, renunciation, truth, nonviolence, self-restraint, patience, as Gandhi says. This is the most constructive work that we can begin with. And then naturally, as those things come to fruition, as you become truthful, nonviolent, healthy, balanced, and your cultivation begins to work for you, automatically it will start to include the people in your life, your immediate community. It happens on its own. It kind of overflows as you become full. And then now we're doing work in the community. Now we're helping to heal the local culture. And the circle of compassion expands on its own. But it always starts within. Begin within.
But I can boldly declare, and with certainty, that so long as there is even a handful of men true to their pledge, there can be only one end to the struggle, and that is victory. Gandhi, Satyagraha in South Africa.
Man here, of course, includes women. That almost goes without saying. He is almost paraphrasing or almost directly quoting a bold declaration that was made by Thoreau, where he said, if only 10,000 men, nay, if only 1,000, nay, if only 100, nay, if only one man were to stand up in the right spirit, slavery would end. So that shows you, in a way, indirectly perhaps, it shows you the belief of a true nonviolent proponent that there is infinite power within the human being, and that power can be mobilized, even if necessary, by a single person. Once she or he does that, of course, others flock to her or him. As Gandhi points out, it's essential that that person holds out to the end and cannot be broken by anything imposed on her or him by the opposition.
And again, I'm reminded that the 3.5% number from Erica Chenoweth, that it requires 3.5% of any population to be outspoken and to force a change in order for that change to be successful. Somewhere around there. And in a large country, that's more people, but it's still a tiny fraction of the total population. It really is a very small number all around. As long as people are boldly also declaring that people are being true to their pledge, they're being honest with themselves, they're making the change inside, and they're reaching out into the community, that's all it takes for a shift to happen. And again, it will happen seemingly by magic, of course, because that's how these things look. It's not overt, because overt is often a form of violence. Instead, it's subtle in the background. It's the direction that healing takes, quiet, using the processes of nature. One of the famous Taoist sayings is that fast injures and slow heals. And so we want to continuously heal the space around us. It's the work of every day, all day, healing us along with the rest, seeking balance. Balance is what we're looking for, not just the opposite end of the spectrum. And so don't be obsessed with trying to do too much, but be willing to have the courage of your convictions. Michael here mentions Henry David Thoreau, a famous American writer. And at one point he's thrown into jail for standing up for the courage of his convictions. And another very famous writer, supposedly, maybe this is just a story, but Emerson comes to visit him and says, "Henry, what are you doing in that jail cell?" And he says, "Ralph, what are you doing not in a jail cell?" And oftentimes that's what it looks like to have the courage of our convictions. It's not always so stark of a difference, but our willingness to stand up for what we believe is right and to be our best selves that we're capable of in that moment, to move forward in the way that's best for us, but always to be true and to have the courage of our convictions, to follow our values, to be our best versions of ourselves. If enough people do that, that is a culture-changing moment.
A truthful man cannot long remain violent. He will perceive in the course of his search that he has no need to be violent. Gandhi, Young India, May 20th, 1925.
Very optimistic, but inevitably following from Gandhi's concept of truth as reality and his understanding of nonviolence as an experiment, not simply as a tactical maneuver. Once we have used violence, we have exhausted what we can do, and the results are going to keep running in, and they're not going to be very good. But when we start using nonviolence, we're really opening the door to an indefinite progress upwards. There's no end to how deeply we can reconcile with former opponents. There's no end to how much we can grow spiritually in the struggle to do that. Whereas violence, you just do it and it's done, and then the results come home to roost in the form of, for example, moral injury, which I understand is now affecting about 90% of U.S. service people. I wish that we could learn the lesson that violence is never going to work.
Yeah, this concept of moral injury is such an important thing to recognize, that people who do violence experience that the majority of the violence is actually happening inside them, to them. Nobody escapes violence, not on the inside or the outside. And in fact, so many of the people that I've run into in the world nonviolence and peace movement, the most active activists, are often people that have experienced violence in the military. And they see what it does. And it wakes them up. They've injured themselves, they've injured other people. Now they deal with that grief, and they want to find a better way for themselves and for their children, their families, their society. And that's people who have been honest with themselves. That's the statement here Gandhi is making. A truthful man cannot long remain violent. A violent person cannot long remain truthful, is the corollary with that. And it's very important to recognize that this willingness to look at the world, to be honest with ourselves, often that's enough to guide us in the right direction. Don't be caught up in your ideas. Don't be obsessed with a thought. Don't be attached to an ideal. Look to see what's actually working for yourself, what is making your community better, what is making you healthier, more balanced. Follow that, not the dogma of somebody else's ideas and books. Rather, let's move together toward the reality of a world that is better for everybody. It's possible, but only if we pay attention and cleave toward truth.
Diversity there certainly is in the world, but it means neither inequality nor untouchability. Gandhi, Mahatma, Volume 3.
Hard to imagine anything more fundamental. Gandhi is talking about what we now call unity in diversity, that because each of us is unique, yet all of us are one. And it's a question of figuring out how to place, how to realize, how to honor that diversity, the capacity of each of us, which is what enables a nonviolent regime to become visible. So people often try to override or conceal diversity in order to, let's say, generate power. Think of the regimentation that happens in militarism. And that just shows visibly that people are adopting the wrong image of life. Life is essentially diverse.
And to allow for this diversity as a strength for the culture, for the people. We want that diversity. We want to allow people to be unique and at the same time to recognize their sameness. Because one allows for natural, human, healthy expression, a diverse, resilient culture, and one allows for personal contentment, personal growth and balance, and a sense of love. We want both. And again, he's talking about inequality and untouchability, which is an Indian caste system where some people were looked down upon so much that they were called untouchables. Horrible. And of course, every culture seems to have some version of that. We want to look past that. We want to stop treating some people as better than others. And by allowing for that, again, this broad circle of compassion to expand, our willingness to see everyone as part of our human family, every animal is part of our existence on this earth, then perhaps all together we can grow and heal rather than just picking and choosing a certain slice of the public that we like, allowing those to flourish while everybody else suffers. That is not a way to create an equitable and balanced world.
So long as the superstition that men should obey unjust laws exists, so long will their slavery exist. And a nonviolent resistor alone can remove such a superstition. Gandhi, Hind Swaraj.
This is because if you try to remove that superstition by violence, you may be employing the opposite of the regime's politics, but you will be basing your resistance on exactly the same principle. This unfortunate fact has been seen over and over again in many a revolution around the world. The reason that revolutionary change seldom leads to a long-term democratic and satisfactory result is that, again, it uses and therefore validates the same force that the oppressor has put in to begin with. But the critical thing here is that when we are oppressed by others, we have to accept that oppression for it to take place. The minute we stand up and say, you may consider me a slave, but I don't consider myself such and I'm not going to act as such, the spell is broken.
And it's so important to continually and publicly break that spell, break that sense of superstition that we're supposed to be one way and not another. That the culture, or the government, or whoever's in power over me says that this is the right way to be. We should all be like this. And so everyone conforms to that because most people just conform because they don't want to be considered an outlier or to be injured, which is reasonable. Then the more people that do it, the harder it becomes for anybody else to step out of that way and to say, hey, maybe there's a different way of doing this. And so the more we're able to be the example for justice and peace in the world, the more publicly we can say, hey, this is not right. I do not wish to conform to this idea. The easier it is for other people, and the more momentum that gains until it becomes a movement. The movement becomes change, as it did in Gandhi's day. But always it starts from this internal sense of freedom, letting go of the fear of being controlled by somebody else, letting go of the fears that they have what you want, and without those things you cannot be happy. Setting yourself up as somebody who thinks it's more important to follow your internal values and principles than it is to get small-term gains and small-term protections from an unjust authority. And the more people that do that, the easier it is for others to begin a change in the world that is easier and safer and better for everybody. We take on that risk upon ourselves in order to take the risk away from other people and make them safer.
I would ask you to forget the political aspect of the program. Political consequences of this struggle there are, but you are not to concern yourself with them. If you do, you will miss the true result and also the political consequences. Gandhi, Young India, March 19th, 1925.
What a contrast to the way we go about problem solving today, which is to think first and foremost and only of the political dimension of things, occasionally throwing in the economic. But for Gandhiji, it was always a human issue. If there were a problem, it was a human problem, and the resources to solve it would come from within the human being, and that's what made him unique in today's political scene. In fact, it made him even more unique in the world's spiritual tradition, because unless you look at someone like George Fox, the founder of Quakerism, there was very little precedent for someone of his spiritual stature to enter into politics. And he does explain why he did that, because his love of mankind took him into that dimension, even though it was not natural for him. Though, in fact, his uncle was, I think, a Diwan. It was kind of his family background.
And we certainly are grateful that Gandhi did eventually decide to enter that political arena, even if it didn't feel natural as a shy person. He calls himself a shy person. And how many politicians would act differently if they were less interested in the politics, which is to say the party favoritism or the desire to be reelected or the chance to get more power, and rather than paying attention to that quality of the political consequence, they concerned themselves with the human consequence, their own values, sticking to what they felt was right and true, and instead shaping their politics around that value, the value of truth, the value of compassion, the value of nonviolence, and allowing everything to flow from that rather than from the acquisition of power and what they thought would turn out the best. If instead we're honest and true and we present ourselves as we are, certainly it would cost a lot less energy, which is probably why Gandhi was able to flourish in that atmosphere. He wasn't struggling to present a certain face. He was just himself. And as himself, he was able to align himself, again, with the truth, the reality of what he was, which requires a lot less energy. And there's a lot more power in that honest expression, that simple face value quality, which seems to be lacking so much in politics and politicians these days. And so if you personally are somebody that is drawn toward that sphere, first cultivate yourself. Learn to be your best self. Figure out what your values are, and then shape your politics around that, rather than the other way around. And that will go much better for you, and certainly will produce better results for the rest of the community.